Abusuya yamma kwa abasonko so eba POG Media ene yɛde bɛkɔ highway ne so highway ne deɛ ensɛm bebree wɔ so a yɛn nso yɛagye pennies yɛbɛmi abedwafoɔ no ahu deɛ ɛrekɔ ɛne deɛ ɛreba na dɛn na ɛrekɔ so ɛwɔ highway ne so ɛyɛ NPP Gǔrǔs na yɛsia no wɔn ani abere dedenden a ɛnyɛ asɛm ketewa koraa ɛyɛ NPP mpanyinfoɔ na wɔn apae line ɛwɔ Nana Akuffo so a ɛnyɛ asɛm ketewa koraa no Agyapade book ne ho nsɛnsɛm a na ɛkyerɛ sɛ abusua yɛde brɛ mu no ama Kwesi Pratt abɛka nsɛm a ɛsi wɔ NPP amanyɔkuo no mu a ɔkyerɛ sɛ NPP Gǔrǔs no wɔn bo afu because ɛkwan a Akuffo ɛpɛ sɛ ɔhijack Ghana no ɛkyerɛ sɛ wɔn nni idea biara about it ɔno nko ara ɛna ayɛ n'adwene sɛ ɔrefa Ghana sika ɛdi nti wɔn abɔ awura ne office ɛkyerɛ sɛ wɔn akɔ akɔkeka bi akyerɛ no a ɛnyɛ asɛm ketewa koraa because Kwesi Pratt koraa no ɔno nso kyerɛ sɛ ɔnte Akuffo ase Ghana sika na anaasɛ state properties a wɔn pɛ sɛ wɔn wia no wɔn wia na wɔn de akɔ hefa abusua yɛbɛpɛ sɛ bɛmi abedwafoɔ no bɛmi akɔ ne akɔ akɔtie nsɛm a Kwesi Pratt de tu dwa ne nsɛm a asi wɔ NPP amanyɔkuo no mu abusua ansa na yɛbɛkɔ no wɔ nsɛmkan bi a fa hyɛ yɛ comment section like na hyɛ ma afoforɔ nso nsa ntumi nka bi aha ɛyɛ POG Media political trending stories a ɛmɛki waves no yɛn nso yɛagye atom sɛ yɛde bɛbrɛ mu mɛdɛmas.
Well, to start with, something is happening in the new patriotic party. And it is something of extreme significance. Except that it appears that it is not being noticed and discussed. Here we have a former Deputy Minister of Finance and Chairperson of the Finance Committee of Parliament making the claim that the country's economy has been run like a Ponzi scheme. That's a significant statement. He is still a member of Parliament of the new patriotic party. But you see, he's not the only one. We have a former Deputy General Secretary, also of the new patriotic party, who only this week came up and said that the people of Ghana should forgive the government, the NPP government. Forgive the NPP government for what? And listen to what he says. He said many things, but listen to what he says. I'm a very principled and candid person. To a certain extent, I also agree with Kweku Kwarteng on the issues he has raised. If you go in for a loan and dig a hole or invest it in a national cathedral project, it is not a profitable venture. We don't need to use taxpayers' money to build a national cathedral. And he claimed that he was one of the people in the party who opposed the project. And he also claims that because of this stand that he took, he was denied appointments. Something is happening in the new patriotic party. Today, as we speak in this studio, Kwabena Japan, former General Secretary of the party, is following Dr. Bawumia around the country, urging people to vote for Dr. Bawumia. But go back a few months ago, when he was involved in the contest for the presidential candidate of the new patriotic party, he gave testimony about how democracy, internal party democracy, was completely destroyed. How leaders of the party, members of the party, were hunted because of what they thought because of what they stood for. This is Kwabena Agyapade, who strangely today is campaigning for the very people he criticized, has completely forgotten what he said only a few months ago. But he has given us an indication of what is happening in the new patriotic party. You understand? Now, listen to Dr. Nyaho a founding member of the party, and what he says about the party. Now, he claims that internal democracy in the party has been completely destroyed, that the party has been hijacked by a small group of persons with loyalty not to principle but to an individual. It doesn't end there. Listen, the majority of members of parliament of the New Patriotic Party went public and told us that the economy was being mismanaged by the then finance minister and demanded that he should be removed from office. Something is happening in the New Patriotic Party. Everywhere you turn, listen to them. Look, Akroma Kennedy Japan. He said that members of the party were looting the national coffers as if there's no tomorrow. And there's more. Now, if these people, prominent members of the party, are telling us that there's no internal democracy in the party, one, they are telling us that decisions about national governance and so on today are being made by a cabal. That is their claim. Now, how would you entrust the whole country to this so-called cabal, which is intent on national destruction? And I'm not the one saying it. I am not the one saying it. Why would you do that? So I think it is important for all of us to take note of what is happening within the New Patriotic Party. What people in the New Patriotic Party are telling us. Only a couple of weeks ago, just before the launch of the outdooring of the vice presidential candidate of the New Patriotic Party, Dr. Martin Opoku Prempeh, something very significant happened. The newspapers published a photograph of the current flag bearer of the New Patriotic Party, Napo, and Wuntumi, Chairman Wuntumi of Kumasi, and said that the flag bearer had resolved differences between them. But nobody told us what the differences were. What were the differences? Was it about national policy? Was it personal? And how come that those differences were so important and crucial that they had to be resolved before the outdooring of Napo in Kumasi? Something is happening in the New Patriotic Party. And all we have to do is to open our ears and listen well and do the proper analysis. Listen, Mr. Alanche Martin, he was a cabinet minister, not an ordinary cabinet minister. Indeed, he was the Minister of Trade. He got so frustrated within the party that he's had to break away to create a new platform to contest for the presidency of this country. What pushed Mr. Alanche Martin out of the New Patriotic Party? What pushed him out? He's speaking today. We should be listening to what he says. He was Minister for Trade and Industries. one of the flagship projects of this government was being implemented under his provision. One district, one factory. What happened to the one district, one factory project? Was he frustrated in the implementation of that project? What happened? So, you see, it is important for us. Don't listen to NDC. Don't listen to CPP. Don't listen to anybody. Listen to the voices in the New Patriotic Party and do your correct analysis. And I cannot forget my very good friend, my very, very good friend, Mr. Albert Kandapa, when he spoke to the judiciary and made the point that if every time the judiciary scores in favor of the sitting government, there is a problem, and there will be a problem. What did he see? Why did he make such a public statement? I think it is important for us to listen to these people in government. Listen to them in government and do your proper assessment. You see, what Mr. Kwaku says is a huge statement. He's talking about a Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme is essentially a 419 operation. And we have seen it here. You remember that just before the 2016 elections, there was a Ponzi scheme which broke out in this country. I think it was called DKM. You remember? Now, Mr. Kwaku is saying that that is how the national economy is being run. There have been several Ponzi schemes based on deceit, based on tricks and so on. But ultimately, the objective of every Ponzi scheme is to steal and destroy. And that's how he describes how this country's economy is being run. I'm frightened. And I think everybody should be frightened. His words are deep. His words are deep, and we need to reflect on those words. Now, he, former Deputy Finance Minister, not an ordinary person, not the Minister for Works and Housing, not the Minister for Information, Deputy Finance Minister is telling us that all that is done is that we borrow large amounts of money. We use part of the money we borrow, listen very carefully, to retire debts, the debts that we owe, and the rest, we use it, we spend it on projects which are not viable, which would not enable us to repay our debt. Is this not the path to complete national disaster? Because if you borrow, and you don't use what you have borrowed in order to stimulate production and productivity so that you can generate resources to repay your loan, but you use it simply to pay debts, you understand? Simply to pay debt and to chop the rest on non-viable projects, that's the surest path to catastrophe, to disaster. And no wonder today Ghana is bankrupt. We are completely bankrupt. We are spending 128% of total national revenue on debt servicing, debt repayment, and public sector emoluments. That's a complete disaster. And if we continue to head in this direction, petroleum prices will continue to increase, the price of bread will continue to increase, the price of cooking oil would increase, the price of gari would increase, the price of maize would increase. Life will become unbearable for our people. And this is the warning which is being sounded. We need to pay attention to this grave warning coming from no less a person than Mr. Kweku Kwarteng. It is also significant that this man, this honorable member of parliament, refused an appointment in the last cabinet reshuffle. What has he seen? Why is he distancing himself? Because no matter what he says, whether it was an internal memo, external memo, or whatever, what he says is weighty and revealing. So I don't care whether he says it's an internal memo or not. He admits that he wrote what has been published. And what has been published is extremely alarming. My brother, lawyer Apia Dankwa, started by making a very valid claim about how nations are developed and so on. And I'd like to emphasize the point that no nation in the world, no nation anywhere has been developed by embarking on the path of capitalism. Never. Because essentially, capitalism depends on exploitation of others in order to accumulate surpluses for its advancement. So, the Western nations we see today, Germany, Britain, France, the United States of America, and so on, thrived in circumstances where they could exploit others to accumulate surpluses. The United States of America benefited essentially from classical slavery. You understand? When others were captured as beasts of burden and made to work for hundreds of years without pay. That is what led to the accumulation, which became the basis of the prosperity of the United States of America. Germany profited essentially from colonialism, where it captured other people's resources, their land, their mineral wealth, and so on, and used it for its own benefit. France today continues to profit hugely from colonial and neo-colonial exploitation. If you look around French-speaking African countries today, all of them without exception, are compelled to keep their foreign reserves in the Central Bank of France. So when France needs money to embark upon development projects and so on, it just takes money from French-speaking Africa for its development. It does not pay interest on it, nothing. When the African countries need resources for their development, they borrow their own money from France and pay interest on it. So it is this exploitation which enables France to somehow meet the needs and aspirations of its ruling elite and the middle class. Even with this level of exploitation, the working people of France, the exploited working class of France, is up in the streets on a constant basis protesting against their living conditions and so on. You take the case of Belgium. How did Belgium attain its current level of comfort and so on? You do know the story of King Leopold, who actually regarded the Congo as his private property. The Congo is one of the most resourced nations in the world. What doesn't the Congo have? Water resources, diamond, everything. You understand? And King Leopold regarded these resources as his private property. Indeed, at a time in history, Congolese nationals who were not able to provide enough rubber for the pleasure of Belgium and its king had their limbs amputated. If you were required to bring a certain quantity of rubber and you failed to do it, they cut one hand. Next time, they cut the other hand. This is how Belgium built its surpluses, which enables it to enjoy a certain level of comfort today. And we can go on and on and on. The reality is that the options available to the capitalist states is not available to African countries like Ghana today. So we have to stop and think. When they come here, IMF, World Bank, and so on, and these Western leaders come and say we should follow the example, do they tell us which people in the world we can go and capture as slaves to work for us for hundreds of years without pay? That option is not available to us. And even if that option was available to us, it would be against our moral values and our ethos as a people. So that option is not available to us. The Ponzi scheme option is not our option. Today, when they say we should follow the West and adopt capitalism, they should be telling us which people we can also go and colonize, steal their resources, steal their gold, steal their diamonds, steal their lithium, and so on, in order to facilitate our development. That option is not available to us. And because these options are not available to us, our leaders continue to deceive us, to give us hope where there's no hope, to continue with this Ponzi scheme that Kwaku Kwarteng describes. And the Ponzi scheme would eventually crash. There is no Ponzi scheme which will last forever. It will crash. Borrow, use part of the money to settle old debts, use part of the money you have borrowed to engage in non-viable projects and so on. It will lead to a crash. So if you are not ready to stop and think, if you are not ready to examine the true options available to us, we will continue on this reckless path of neo-colonialist capitalist development and crash. Ghana has almost crashed now as we speak. If it continues into the future, God save us. Armageddon will visit us. Armageddon is what our destiny would be. Now, you see, what Kwaku Kwarteng writes is something we should sit down seriously and reflect upon. And if we were to sit down seriously and reflect upon what he has written, it will lead us to major changes in our approach to development. Major changes. Look, it was in 1945 in Manchester, in the United Kingdom, that all the prominent leaders of Africa and Africans in the diaspora, the Pan-African movement, met and examined our conditions and came to a number of conclusions. One of the conclusions they came to was that we needed to free ourselves from colonial exploitation. We needed to embark upon the national liberation project to break the links we had with Europe and so on. 1. 2, they came to the conclusion that we needed to own our resources and to exploit these resources for our own benefit. And they came to the conclusion that we needed to unite Africa under the banner of scientific socialism. There is no better option than this option which was determined in Manchester. And indeed, if we look back to 1957 to 1966, you can see the tremendous progress that this country made when it followed that path to development. And since we abandoned that path to development, you can see the crisis upon crisis that we continue to suffer. The African people, the Ghanaian people, have no option to the Nkrumah's program for national development, for the acceleration of the national development process, and we need to return to that. My brother Senna, I nearly said Suhini. My brother Senna.
I wonder why.
Oh, it's clear.
Last time I was on the show,
Interviewing the interviewer.
constantly. It sort of said understandable.
Yes. My brother Senna. This is where we are. Look, not too long ago, in 2001, the Western countries came up and their allies came up and said, look, there's a solution to our huge indebtedness and lack of development. And they christened it HIPIC. They had a program called Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative. And were compelled to adopt HIPIC. At the time, we were spending 2/3 of our export revenue on debt servicing. Mark you, 2/3 not of the gross national revenue, of export earnings alone on debt servicing. And we're crying. We said this was not sustainable. They told our leaders to climb the mountaintops and to declare themselves highly indebted and poor. We build schools with HIPIC benefits imprinted on them and so on. Our condition today is worse than 2001. Our condition today is worse than 2001. HIPIC resolved nothing. It resolved nothing. And sometimes you wonder. I mean, I always make reference to what Albert Einstein has told us. Albert Einstein has told us that if you continuously do the same things and expect different results, you need psychiatric attention. And we have done the same things over and over and over again and expect the same result. We are always running to the International Monetary Fund for bailout. And after every bailout, our conditions become worse. And we continue rushing to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. What are the psychiatrists in this country doing? The psychiatrists in this country must be arresting our leaders and looking into their brains. Because they are doing the same things over and over again and they're expecting different results. The psychiatrists have a job to do. This is the problem. You go to IMF, and in a country where one of the major problems confronting us is unemployment, and one of the conditions for the bailout is that freeze employment in the public sector. And you agree. You agree. So how are you solving that problem? In 1982-83, look at the disaster which befell us because we went to the IMF and the World Bank to teach us how to resolve our problems. We were told to retrench labor. In less than 1 year, we retrenched more than 300,000 workers. They lost their jobs. Is that progress? If you have a leadership who thinks that this is progress, my goodness, then we are in deep, deep trouble. They told us to privatize state enterprises, and we sold state enterprises like mad. We even went to the extent of establishing a divestiture implementation committee. Now, Senator, tell me today, of the 400 and so enterprises that we sold, how many survived? How many did well? Out of 400, today, only 2 are surviving. Only 2. Movenpick, Ambassador, and Golden Tulip. All the rest have collapsed. So this nonsense about the private sector being the engine of development has been totally discredited. We've handed everything over to private hands, and everything has collapsed except 2. And even the 2 tell me how they benefit our nation. Doesn't make sense. Now also take note, the people who are constantly telling us that the private sector is the engine of development, is the engine of growth and so on. Anytime they take power, all of them ran from the private sector like Usain Bolt and take over the state structure. All of them. So if the private sector is the engine of growth, if the private sector is the engine of development, why don't they stay in the private sector? Why do they always run to take over the public sector? Something is wrong. I am so very, going to say happy. I don't think it's the right thing to say. But I find it so extremely interesting that Kwaku has made these remarks. And I think that it's important for us to reflect on these demands. And we should not just reflect on these demands. This reflection should lead us to the adoption of a better model of development for our country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If you just join us, Madaba Talk Shows, Alaji and Alaji. And of course, we're just discussing the article written by Kwaku Kwarteng, who is a member of parliament. He's actually chairman of the Finance Committee of Parliament, former Deputy Minister for Finance. He wants a change in direction. It's an advice to the NPP, but sounds like he was doing an analysis of a country's politics over a period of time. We have to move on to another discussion. We don't have much time. The discussion on the decision of a Court of Appeal on the case against Dr. Kisela Tuforsen, the minority leader, Mr. Richard Jakpa, Big C Limited. The Court of Appeal has essentially brought that matter to a close. So there's no further hearings. The Attorney General is threatening to head to the Supreme Court this time around. On this one, I'll start with Mr. Kojuchumbuafo. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. You have a lawyer here, so
6 minutes.
he's the best person to explain to us what has gone on. But from an engineer's point of view, looking into law, Dr. Tuforsen should never have been taken to court. He acted on the instructions of his boss, the finance minister, who has gone to that same court to say, I gave him the instructions, so I'm the one you should be charging. But
abusua we ne ensema ekoso ewo highway ne so eye NPP Gǔrǔs and ama pilai wo Akuffo ne Gabi asari ochim da kon ne achim mafias na nkasa no echese omo se omo hia omo ewo NPP amanu kurima a enye asem ketwa abusua kwasi prat ene yete ne nkana aha eye POG Media political trending stories a emeki waves no yenso ya di atum se ye debebremo medamase